Hello there and welcome to Foreign Affairs. Welcome to our viewers around the world and here in Ghana. The 8th Commonwealth debate on sports for development is underway in the United Kingdom. Sports is a force for good and experts are rather increasing the calls for the incorporation of artificial intelligence, which is noted as a very vital or an essential factor that could drive change through the use of sports. As the debates are underway, I want to bring in now Lane Robinson, who's the head of social policy department at the Commonwealth Secretariat, joining us now for a conversation on this. And how nice to be talking to you. Thank you so much for spending some time with us. Let's get to it then, the debates that we're seeing now and what's we've been hearing over the past few days. Why is this instructive and also some sort of a contribution to the conversation that is going around on artificial intelligence and its benefit to the sporting world?
Well, thank you very much. The 8th Commonwealth debate, Sport for Development debate, is an annual event that we have in the Commonwealth. What we do there is to really bring together experts, governments, stakeholders in the sports sector to really look at some of the emerging ideas and concepts that are in the sports arena. Of course, from a policy perspective, but also from a very practical and programmatic perspective as well. And so this year, our focus has been on artificial intelligence as the answer to accelerating power of sport in helping to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And so this debate is quite relevant to what is the current discourse on artificial intelligence and its uses or its application. There has not been much discussion around its application in sport. And so in this debate, we are trying to unpack and unearth what are the pros and cons, what are the positive, but also what are some of the negatives that we can expect if AI were to be applied to sport for development and peace.
The challenge actually has got to do with, the imbalances and inequalities that we face even within the Commonwealth itself. The level of development varies from country to country, and knowing that artificial intelligence involves the use of technology, the question then is, how do we achieve parity to ensure a smooth transitioning?
No, it's an excellent question. The Commonwealth is a diverse association of member countries that have come together from all across the world, from the Pacific, Africa, Asia, Europe, the Caribbean. But the Commonwealth as an institution is there to help to leverage, bring those people together, work through their diversities and bring a unique creativity, a unique innovative perspective on development outcomes. And so the work of the Secretariat, the work of the Commonwealth in this AI space now is actually trying to say, in the great push towards having, artificial intelligence and other transformative technologies really enhance development, member states in the Commonwealth, the small, the vulnerable member states, should not be left behind. And so the work of the Commonwealth has been, for example, to establish a Commonwealth AI consortium that brings together the top tech companies in the world to say we must not leave those small and vulnerable member states behind, those countries that are not at the place where the more developed countries are. We must do more now to make sure that we are leveling the playing field for them. We are making sure that in this AI revolution, they are included. So actually, this is actually quite a good test case for the Commonwealth to see whether, we can continue to, see countries be further separated by the challenges of technology, or we can see how we could bring countries together, the stronger countries working with those who are probably not as strong, those who are advanced with technologies, supporting and helping those who perhaps are not as advanced to make sure they also reap the benefits for their young people with this AI revolution.
But here's the thing, Lane, and I believe that you would agree with me, that Africa has a peculiar challenge. Infrastructure, of course, the economic challenge is still prevalent on the continent. Why should AI be, on top of the agenda for many governments across the continent?
Well, primarily because AI is, it is now some would argue the entity, the thing that will actually help to solve a lot of the challenges we have. I mean, human society is nothing but people trying to always advance, do better, do more. And so AI is the latest iteration of that. You could go back into time, the Industrial Revolution. All these things were ways that society was always been trying to improve and enhance. Well, in the tech space, this is now the reality that we face. And I think the question that we must ask now is, if this is going to happen, we can't now say, go back AI, go back technology. It's already here. the question that we must ask ourselves, how do we make the best use of this to enhance development outcomes? This is what the sports debate is trying to unpack, to say, okay, AI is here. You can't say go back AI. It's already here. Do we put our head in the sand and say, in the sports space, sports is all about athletics and all the good stuff, the games. Let's just focus on that. Let's not think about this. The debate is trying to say, no, no, no. Let's begin to ask those difficult questions now. I guess it's the question that all countries should be asking in other sectors as well. What do we do? Do we keep our head in the sun, or do we try to find ways to enhance and therefore help to make development happen better? So in the debate, we were able to look at both sides of that argument, which is the fun part of it. And actually, what we're finding was there are actually very good examples of how AI can help to bring the development even in countries in the Africa region. And there were others were arguing that, of course, with regulation, with discussions on ethics, we can make a difference in that space. So it's a good debate to have, and I think we're not afraid of having that debate,
Right.
and we welcome it, actually.
Yeah, and I recall having this conversation with the Secretary General at the AU Summit in Ethiopia, where she was talking about the immense benefit that we could derive from the use or incorporation of artificial intelligence. But there are those skeptics who still believe that artificial intelligence is rather shrinking the opportunities much more for African countries. How do we juxtapose this? The fact that some believe it's rather creating more industries, more opportunities, and the others who are on the other side of the aisle believing that it's looking gloomy for the world, especially Africa.
Well, the thing is, with anything that is new and different and is not fully understood, you will have these conversations, these speculations, and that is fair. And we must allow space for people to have these conversations. Across generations, even the older populations sometimes are a little bit skeptical of what the use cases of or the benefits of what this could be. And I think in the Commonwealth, what we want to do is to reassure people that we want to have these honest conversations. That's what the Commonwealth is. We're not afraid to deal with difficult questions. If there are issues to be tackled and matters to be resolved, that's what we want to do. But you can take, for example, how we are approaching it. We've set up this AI consortium. The Secretary General would have spoken about that as an initiative that intends to bridge the gap and bring people together. We have even gone further, where we are now having AI for Youth, a full training resource free of charge to any young person in the Commonwealth that wants to tap into that. We're doing that because we don't want any young person, wherever they are, to be left behind. And we're working with big partners such as Intel to make this kind of training available in schools, out of schools, so that people can get involved. So I guess the issue here is, unless you kind of engage with what this new entity is, this AI, this tool, you probably won't be able to deal with it and benefit from it if there are benefits to be had. So the starting point must be, let's make you aware of what it is. Let's first get you on top of the brief so you understand how it works, what are the ethical considerations, and by so doing, you're armed with information that you as an individual, as a citizen of the Commonwealth, can navigate the next steps in your life. So we have AI for Youth, which is just launched as well, that we are now making available to every Commonwealth citizen anywhere, every young citizen in school, out of school, so you can benefit into curriculums if you need it to be. We're also doing the very same thing for public sector workers. Those government officers who may be a little bit afraid or not so certain where this is all going to go. We want to demystify those fears and help you to have the good information so you can make appropriate and good decisions.
Okay. The marching orders after the debate, because some say it's talk shop, where's the action?
That's excellent. And that is why in the debate, we top and tail it. So we begin and end with a discussion on where does this need to go after. So the debate is an exercise in, it's like a sport for the mind, if you will. You have pro and con discussions, the wit of debating style. That was all a bit of fun. But actually, after the fun and after the decisions about who is won and who is not won, the debate, then the conversation is about what do we do with the information we have. And for us in the Commonwealth, we have three things that we will be focusing on. Number one, we have a sports ministers meeting in July in the wings of the Olympics, where we'll be putting that question about how ministries of sport can harness the power of AI as part of the agenda. Number two, we will be having a heads of government meeting this year in Samoa, a very small state that some would argue should not be in the conversation about AI because they are far remote and they don't have infrastructure. No, what we're actually going to be doing there is to say, let us see what some of the moonshot ideas, the great innovative ideas that we can bring that will showcase how AI can deal with health, education,
Right.
sports even. So two things. And the third thing that we're going to do is, as I mentioned, rolling out programs that actually help people to have the knowledge and awareness about AI so they can make good decisions.
And I believe that it's not the case that our youth are not ready to embrace AI. I guess, you know, an average viewer, maybe from the youthful population in Ghana watching us now, is asking the question, will AI provide me with the same opportunities just as any other youth or member in the member countries of the Commonwealth, say in the developed North or in the UK where you are?
Well, the truth is it can. And I think that is what we're finding with already examples we have in other countries. In India, when we made the AI for Youth program available there, the young people there who were not, you know, in a position to access this technology were beginning to create so many innovative ideas that actually were creating new jobs. There was one young lady who, you know, was using the AI in school. She developed using the technology of AI to develop a mechanism to spot crime before it starts happening. Another one was using it to identify and to solve problems of blockchain, looking at the supply chain issues. So young people already, once you give them the tools or arm them with the tools, whether in the global north or the global south, they are able to creatively, innovatively, once the level playing field is there, to create the kind of employment and other opportunities that they can do. Our job in the Commonwealth is to provide that support for them, provide them so that they are not left behind. And by so doing, I just trust the capability of our citizens across the Commonwealth to innovate beyond our measure.
If there's a message for African governments on the incorporation of AI and also sports for development, what would that be?
Don't be afraid of the technology. I think the message we got from the debate is don't be afraid of it. It is something that we need to engage with. Whether you're for it or against it, still engage in a conversation. That's what the Commonwealth is about, dialogue and discourse. By doing that, we are learning from each other. We are learning, you're challenging me, I'm challenging you. We're going back and forth, but we are learning together. That is what Commonwealth is about. And by doing that, then perhaps we will find the good use cases for this. If there are bad cases, then we need to point them out. But we can only come to that place through dialogue and discourse. That is the spirit of Commonwealth.
And I thought that would have been the last one, but the issue about regulation and, you know, checking the potential dangers of fake news. We're in the information age, and that's also a possible reality, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. And this was pointed out very clearly within the context of the debate as well, that there needs to be a role for government, a role for young people, a role for the tech companies. There are roles that are to be defined here. And I think this is what the AI consortium in its formulation has tried to do. We are actually working now on setting policies toolkits with policies that can say to countries, here is a policy that can help you regulate. You don't need to go and reinvent the wheel. If one country in the Commonwealth has already designed a policy to regulate AI, as a Commonwealth, we can share that resource, make the job easier for other persons to use as well. So we have not forgotten about that regulatory issue. It is a topical one, but our answer to that remains the same. Within the Commonwealth, let us share what we have. Let us, you know, work together, because the solution is within the vast array of countries we have within the Commonwealth family.
And I'm just wondering if at this point there's any goodwill message to the people of Ghana. Obviously, we're a member of the Commonwealth. What are you leaving us with?
Well, this is the year of youth. So in my capacity, we are supporting young people all this year. I guess the message simply is, you know, believe in your young people. I'm always the first one to say that, because in our young people is so much capacity for change, for good in the world. Don't look at them as the ones who give problems all the time. We talk about an asset-based approach to young people. See young people as positives. You know, the vast majority of young people are doing well, want to work hard. They just need our support. So in this year of youth, our key message to any country, any partners in the world is believe in your young people, feature them, empower them, invest in them. That's the best way to make your country sustainable for the future. Invest in your young people.
And Lane Robinson is the head of social policy at the Commonwealth Secretariat. Thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Thank you.
And as we wrap up on foreign affairs today, we also leave you with a conversation with Jose Antonio. He's the former finance minister for Colombia. He's here in Ghana having a conversation with experts on reforming the international financial architecture. Jose Antonio, thank you for talking to Joy News. How is Accra treating you, first of all, and Akwaba? That's our way of welcome.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
No, thank you very much. It has been very nice to be here, and of course the discussion it's a complex one, to put it simply, given the problems of sub-Saharan Africa in relation to debt issues, but also the lack of a global institutional framework to manage the current situation. And let me say, of course, it's a problem of sub-Saharan Africa, but it's also a problem of developing countries. I mean, you can say let's say the situation of Sri Lanka, for example, which has been also very critical in Asia, and in my continent, Latin America, Argentina and Ecuador.
And of course, you have immense experience having served with the United Nations and working on all of these common challenges we face across the world. But more prominent is the case of Africa, because it's a fact that the continent is in crisis, with many countries having a sovereign debt crisis. Just at the last African Union summit, heads of states were dialoguing on the possible way out. That's because the figures are not too good. You take a look at, for instance, the percentage of our export earnings as compared to our foreign debt is hovering way beyond 140%. Jose, what's your own diagnosis of the problem as to why Africa is increasingly becoming insolvent?
Well, I think it's a combination of problems. From the discussion here, since I'm not an Africa expert, let's say, I have learned two things that are important. One, which is actually quite common with Latin America, particularly with South America, which is the effect of commodity prices. When commodity prices collapse, like we said, for example, copper, then you have to see how to manage both the external deficit, the balance of payment deficit, but also the fiscal implications that you will have. So that's one type of problems. But the others are the other problem is the fact that sub-Saharan Africa started to get, let's say, bond and private financing on a larger scale. And let me say, even from the experience of Latin America, that's a complex issue. Right. How to get the good financing, but also how to manage over-indebtedness. Right. Well, and let me say another problem that is prominent is when there are international financial crisis of some sort, then the financing is cut and becomes more expensive. I mean, that has been quite clear since the issue of Ukraine, when the world inflation went up significantly, interest rate went up, and there was a cut in financing from the private sector to developing countries, and the financing that was available was very expensive. So the management of those private sector issues, which in a sense, in the case of Latin America, that goes back to, let's say, the 1970s, 1980s, but also recently. And then, of course, you can go back in history, for example, during the Great Depression of the 1930s, which was a huge problem. Yeah. By the way, so it's how to manage private financing in a sustainable way, and to avoid or to manage the pro-cyclical problems associated with that financing. The fact that you get good financing during booms, you can get no financing or very expensive financing during crashes.
But we'll do a comparative analysis shortly and possibly pick some lessons from Latin America, where you have a vast experience on how they were able to turn the corner. But let's talk about the way this is all feeding into the global conversation of the need, not just for Africa, but the entire world, to consider repositioning the international financial architecture, because some believe that that's where the solution lies, and we must start now.
Yeah. Well, let me say that in the discussions that were quite extensive last year from the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, the G20, the World Bank, etc., it is quite clear that there are many issues that have to be reformed in the international financial architecture. I think the greatest consensus I saw was in the role of the multilateral development banks. But interestingly, this issue of debt was not prominent in many of those discussions, or rather in many of those decision-making processes. When you see for example, I mean, there was of course the G20 launched this comprehensive framework. I mean, further debt suspension initiative during the COVID year, 2020. But at the end of that year, this common framework, which has been used by 4 African countries. But the common framework negotiations are very long, very extensive. Getting everybody involved is extremely or has not taken place. And even large creditors for sub-Saharan Africa, official creditors, which is the role of China, right, don't participate necessarily in those processes, but want the separate process. So it has been a very complex process. And let me add to that in the G20 meeting in India last year, there was absolutely nothing new on that. Absolutely nothing. When you read the statement and the agreement of the heads of state of the G20, there is only one paragraph that just mentions the common framework, which is an inadequate mechanism, as we have seen. So it has to be significantly improved for sub-Saharan Africa, but also for the middle-income countries that do not have access to the common framework.
If there's any challenge we're facing now, it's access to development financing. Some proposals have been put forward, for instance, from our president, who's a champion of the African Union institutions for financial reform. And the call partly is that we begin to invest much more of our sovereign reserves even in African institutions. The call to use, for instance, the AFDB and other multilateral institutions present here in Africa. So we are able to easily draw down when we're in crisis. Is that the solution to the challenge, or perhaps it's a more nuanced situation as you would want to?
Well, I think there are two problems that have to be managed in the case of let's say official financing. Yeah. The first one is the one you mentioned at the end of your question, which is in our jargon of economists, counter-cyclical financing. So when crises come, as I said before, the private financing tends to be less available or not available, and therefore you need the development banking system and official development assistance to come in to support countries. The role of multilateral development banks is particularly important, but let me say in that regard that my research on that issue is that the World Bank has more than done a good job in that regard, and particularly for poor countries during the recent crisis. But some of the regional development banks have not, and the African Development Bank was not very active during the crisis. So the countercyclical role has to be emphasized for the World Bank, but in here also for the African Development Bank. Okay, and even let me say for official development assistance, which is of course very important for sub-Saharan Africa. Now, the other issue is long-term financing. Long-term financing is very important. I mean, for many reasons, but I guess climate change is probably the most important individual issue that has to be managed. So, how to manage that, financing of climate change? When countries do not have the resources to do so, and they play an important role. I mean, all countries of the world play an important role. Of course, sub-Saharan Africa not because of consumption, but South America, for example, are important in natural resources, particularly forests. How to protect the forests is a very important issue, and again, and how to finance, let's say, the green technologies for electricity generation, for cars, etc., etc. So that's a whole problem. Now, the consensus last year in this discussion of multilateral development banks is that multilateral development banks have to significantly increase their financing. Even the most conservative proposal was from this group of experts of the G20 said that it more has to triple by 2030. The UN was even more ambitious than that. But also that for these areas, you have to have concessional financing. So financing which are very long term, and with low interest rates. Now the question is, for that you need official resources from developed countries to finance those concessional elements.
And I'm sorry, that's where geopolitics comes in, right? As we're seeing it play even across the African continent. You take the case of some African countries that are heading in for the IMF austerity plan. Zambia has been a perfect case of how increasingly there is some sort of a decline in consensus globally amongst the superpowers. What's your take on that? Do you feel that this increasing geopolitics is beginning to cripple the economic progress of African nations?
Well, let me say there are old problems there and new problems. The old problem is that that most countries don't even meet the Official Development Assistance Committee that they agreed in the United Nations decades ago, of 0.7% of gross national income in official development assistance. Very few countries meet that criteria, the United States being one of the worst, but also Japan is bad in that regard, and many European countries don't meet the commitment. That's one problem, and therefore that has to be a commitment to meet. Let's say in that regard, there are a few countries that have moved in the right direction. Actually, the United Kingdom being one of them. Now, but the other problem of geopolitics, let's say today, is that there's a lot of financing to, let's say, to certain conflicts are going on that are which means that the demand for those resources, I mean, particularly for Ukraine, is taking a significant amount of resources that have reduced the availability of financing. And let me say that the availability of resources is important also for the capitalization of the multilateral development banks, because without the capitalization, there is no way the multilateral development banks can increase the financing as the G20 expert group proposed. And that's a problem, plus the politics of this, notably in the case of the United States, where Congress is, let's say, is reluctant to capitalize multilateral development banks.
I see. The point about China and how China's influence has been growing on many of these African countries, even in terms of its sovereign debt renegotiations of such. I take, for instance, Ghana. 3/3 or 1/3 of our external debts owed to China. You have the same thing playing out for Zambia and other African countries that had a challenge doing their debt restructuring. We're still at that point now, even talking about Ghana, where just last week the IMF Chief Executive, Kristalina Georgieva, was here in Accra raising similar concerns about how the official creditors are still watching to see how it would go about the Eurobond restructuring. How do you feel that countries such as Ghana, can turn the corner and to deal with this challenge in a very tactful manner without throwing away what the official creditors are giving us?
No, one of the problems with official creditors, and this is not only with China, but China is on board now in that regard, is that they don't want to see haircuts or reductions of the debts, which I think many sub-Saharan African countries do need a haircut. Is not the same debt that they can pay. In the case of China, I think there are two additional problems. The first is the interest rate they charge is higher than for example, the interest rates of the official financing of the developed countries, of the multilateral development banks. And finally, but not less important, that they do not participate on an equal basis in the renegotiation process. They want to have their own process, which is sometimes also difficult. Let me say, I don't know how many cases of that there are in Africa, but let me say that in many cases, let's say the lending by by China, for example, the China Development Bank, is done on poor projects or poor initiatives,
Right.
And therefore the quality of the investment that they finance is not good. Let's say in Latin America, for example, there was a huge problem in the lending to Venezuela by China, which was about half of the lending to Latin America went to Venezuela. Essentially, those projects got bad, and actually Venezuela, in retrospect, has to pay it in oil.
Right.
Now, but you have Sri Lanka. That's another case in which there was massive financing from China that went bad.
And speaking about Sri Lanka, that's the fear that the worst might happen to, some of these African countries facing a sovereign debt crisis. Judging from what happened there, learning lessons and comparing, notes, what is critical now for African countries in terms of policy measures to immediately consider?
Well, I mean, there are domestic policy measures, but there are global policy issues, and I say there has to be, as I said yesterday in the conference, well, there has to be the creation of an institutional mechanism at the global level to renegotiate debts. That's one issue that has to be done, but it will take some time. But the other is an ad hoc mechanism. The most important for Sub-Saharan Africa was the multilateral debt relief that was agreed in 2005, and which essentially reduced the debt to almost nothing for several countries. I mean, it has been very clear in the presentations here, and there were more than 40% of low-income countries with debt over indebtedness back in the 1990s, and it went down to 5%. So it was a very successful. So something like that has to be adopted, which means that there has to be a debt relief on a one-time basis, let's say. I think that for Sub-Saharan Africa, actually, when you see the debt of Sub-Saharan Africa at the global level, that's a little amount of money compared to the global financial issues. So it should not be that difficult to adopt a very ambitious mechanism in that regard. So that's one. That's, I think, what has now at the national level. You also need domestic restructurings. I mean, from the presentations, it is quite clear that some of the African countries have very low taxation. They have to increase taxation. Actually, there are many countries that give tax benefits to natural resource companies.
Right.
That's something that
tax waivers, you mean? Yes.
Yeah, tax waivers.
Yes,
Yeah,
right.
that's unacceptable in my view. Actually, some of the natural resources should pay extra in terms of taxes because that's a natural resource that actually the countries lose when the exploitation of the minerals or oil take place. So that's one point. But good taxation is one element, but also let's say good fiscal management in general. You cannot, you don't have enough taxes. You cannot increase government spending much. You have to take that into account. And let me say also that I like this idea from the Latin American history of the natural resources funds. Right. That was an old mechanism that Colombia used for coffee, but it's also a mechanism that Chile developed for copper. How does that work? Well, when there are booms in the prices of those commodities, there are savings that are done by the country, which the country can then use when the commodity prices fall. Right. So it's a good mechanism that I think should be developed in all commodity exporting countries.
Right. And as we wrap up our conversation, what we're doing now, and together with the experts that you're joining in Accra, is considered as a very timely intervention that will help spur growth across the African continent. The belief is that together with the experts like yourself and the others doing the conversations today, some solution of a sort will be developed. What's your expectation, going into these 3 days of talks, engagements around, the need to reform the international financial architecture, and what do you feel should be the end game?
Well, let me say that I already mentioned both the structural issue, but also the ad hoc or the emergency solution, which have to be part of this international financial architecture. And I hope the discussion gets into the main, into proposing a specific solution. I must say the African Union can play a fundamental role. It played a fundamental role in international taxation last year when it promoted the convention of the UN on international tax cooperation. The same thing should be done. And now that the African Union is member of the G20, I think it's an additional opportunity in that regard.
Thanks for watching. I'm Blessed Suga, and of course, for more news, just log on to myjoyonline.com. We have more stories there.